So this chapter, photosynthesis. We were done with cellular respiration, so you guys have got that down. You know that cellular respiration is the process by which we take glucose, we break it down through a bunch of oxidation reactions to get ATP out at the end. And the end product is carbon dioxide and water. Glucose plus oxygen becomes carbon dioxide and water. So this chapter, photosynthesis, is all about how we make glucose. So this is going to be basically the opposite of cellular respiration. So we're, instead of changing, like during cellular respiration, we change glucose into ATP, take chemical energy, transform it into chemical energy. This time, we have to get energy from someplace else. We get it from the sun. That's how plants do photosynthesis, from the sun. And basically, photosynthesis is the sole way that everything on the earth gets energy. We can trace it all back to photosynthesis. So the living things that make their own energy are called autotrophs, because troph means your way of eating, so autotroph is you feed yourself. And autotrophs are what we call producers, because they make the organic material that is used for energy by everything else. So they produce organic material from carbon dioxide and incorporating other inorganic molecules. And almost all plants are what we call photoautotrophs, photo meaning light here, meaning they make their own food from sunlight. So other than just plants, there are certain algae and other protists and some prokaryotes that do photosynthesis. So it's not just plants, but plants obviously do a lot of it. So here, there's some plants. Algae are a different group of living things that share a very common ancestor with plants. They're basically plants that live in water. And then there's some single-celled organism like protists, some bacteria that also do photosynthesis. Here are all of them. Okay. And then there's things that need energy but can't make their own energy, and so they get their food from another source. And that's called heterotroph, hetero meaning different or other. We are heterotrophs because we get our organic material, our food, our glucose from something else. Whether we're eating plants, which directly made the glucose, or whether we're eating something else, which ate something which ate plants. And we are called the consumers. We consume other food to get our energy. So 10.1 talks about the basic overview of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis occurs in chloroplasts. And remember that because it's very structurally similar to photosynthetic bacteria. Remember the endosymbiotic theory, that an early eukaryotic cell engulfed through phagocytosis a photosynthetic bacteria, and that's why they have their own ribosomes, their own DNA, and a double membrane around the outside. And the structural organization of these cells allows for the chemical reactions of photosynthesis. Remember, structure fits function. So the structure of a chloroplast, chloroplasts are found in plants, obviously, mostly in leaves. So the leaves of the plants are the ones that generally do the most photosynthesis. And the reason that they're green is because they have a pigment in them called chlorophyll, which is found in the chloroplasts. And chlorophyll is a pigment, so it's a group of molecules that captures the light energy and then allows that to use that energy to build glucose. And there's these tiny little holes in the bottom of a leaf called stomata, and that's how carbon dioxide gets in and out. They don't have a mouth and a nose to breathe, but they take in carbon dioxide and get rid of oxygen through the stomata, which are these little pores in the bottom of the leaves. So chloroplasts are found mostly in leaves, or the cells called the mesophyll cells, and each mesophyll cell has about 30 to 40 chloroplasts. So here's a cross-section of the leaf, and these cells right in the middle, not the top layer or the bottom layer, those are the mesophyll cells, and they have tons of chloroplasts in them, which do photosynthesis. And inside the chloroplast is a bunch of membranes of thylakoids, which are little sacs of membrane that are stacked on top of each other in the chloroplast. So there's a thylakoid. They're all stacked on top of each other, and the group of them is called grana. So a stack is a grana, a singular is a thylakoid. And the stuff inside of the chloroplast, do I have a better picture of that? All this space inside is the stroma. So it's like the matrix of the mitochondria or the cytosol of the cell, just the space inside. So Make sure you know the structure of the chloroplast. And here is the photosynthesis equation. 6 CO2 plus 12 H2O plus light energy becomes C6H12O6 plus 6 O2 plus 6 H2O. You'll notice there's 6 extra waters on each side, and we'll talk about that. But it's the same thing as the cellular respiration equation, or backwards. It's the backwards cellular respiration equation. Talk about the splitting of water later. So photosynthesis is a redox process where we oxidize water and reduce CO2. We're going to keep reducing CO2 until we get to glucose. The same way how in cellular respiration we take glucose and we keep oxidizing it until we get to CO2. There's 2 steps of photosynthesis: the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. They're sometimes called the dark reactions, but we're going to call them the light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle. And the light-dependent reactions split water, release oxygen, reduce NADP plus to NADPH, reduced meaning it's gaining an electron. So it goes from NADP plus, it's no longer positive, it becomes NADPH, and they create ATP from ADP by something called photophosphorylation. Remember we learned about oxidative phosphorylation and substrate level phosphorylation. This one's a little bit different, it's photophosphorylation. And the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma, so the light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid membranes, just like how the ETC happens in the cristae of the mitochondria. These happen in the thylakoids of the chloroplast. And the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. So that's why we have different areas for which these reactions to happen, because they need different things. And the Calvin cycle makes sugar using the ATP and the NADPH that we need in the light-dependent reactions. So it's like the light-dependent reactions harness the energy from the sun, and they store that in the chemical energy of ATP and NADPH. Then that ATP and NADPH go to the Calvin cycle to make the glucose. The Calvin cycle begins with something called carbon fixation, which we'll talk about, which is when we take carbon dioxide and we start building carbon-carbon bonds to build our organic molecules. So here is the overview of photosynthesis. Here is a thylakoid, a grana. One of these is a thylakoid, the whole thing is a grana. And we take water and we split water into oxygen when the light energy hits. So what did it say about splitting water? So we take water and we split it into hydrogen and oxygen. And then what happens is those electrons get released, and then we use the electrons to store energy. So water becomes oxygen, just like how in cellular respiration we take oxygen and it accepts the electrons and it becomes water. So it's exactly the opposite. Now we're taking water, splitting it in half, and we're stealing the electrons away. So we split water during the light-dependent reactions when the light energy comes in. We make ATP and NADPH and oxygen is released. This is the oxygen that we breathe. It comes from light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. Now we have ATP and NADPH. These are made from ADP and NADP+. We reduced both of them. Then the ATP and the NADPH go to power the Calvin cycle, which happens inside the stroma, which is why it's not on top of the thylakoid right here. Carbon dioxide goes in, uses these energy molecules to reduce carbon dioxide. So NADPH is going to give up its electrons to carbon dioxide. It's going to reduce carbon dioxide as it gets oxidized back to NADP+. And we get out a precursor to glucose, which here is CH2O, which will turn into glucose. So that is the whole thing of photosynthesis. So this right here gives you all the basics that you need to know of photosynthesis.